Hello, everyone, and welcome to Women in Cloud's Prioritize Yourself, a look at life hacks and rituals to restore mind, body, and spirit. Wow, has it been a year? When you look back on March of last year, so much has happened since then. And here we are today looking at how we can move into a new year with a bright outlook and taking care of ourselves and our body, health, spirit, and mind. I'm Giovanna Mingarelli, and I am the CEO and co-founder of MNC Consulting and MC2. I am your moderator for this session. I'm excited to be here and to share the next hour with these extraordinary women from the Women in Cloud community who will talk about the ways that they are prioritizing their well-being in the midst of both the positives and also some of the more challenging aspects of being women in business, in particular, women in STEM. We're going to kick this off with an overview of the session today. So to begin with, I want to make sure that everyone knows that this is a participatory event. So please engage and ask questions over the course of the event to make your experience memorable. Please remember to cheer using the smiley face icon to share live reactions with emojis and to connect during the social lounge experience with other attendees. And finally, please remember to share on social media using hashtag Women in Cloud, hashtag She Soars, and hashtag WIC Power 2021 so you can join the movement. We're going to kick this off with the one and only fabulous Bria Starmer. Bria is the founder and president of Lions and Tigers. Bria will be speaking with us today about finding our highest and best use and ditching the rest. Bria, so excited to hear from you today.
Thank you so much, Giovanna. It's so nice to see everyone. Hello. Is anyone else tired? I'm feeling a little tired, and that is because I am the mother of 3 kids under 6. And I have a newborn. I'm just coming back from maternity leave, so certainly I'm not sleeping through the night. And I also run a consultancy, as you heard, Lions and Tigers, and we're about anywhere between 75 and 100 people, so a fast-growing agency. I have a husband, we have an Airbnb, so certainly there's a lot going on. Many of you have a lot going on too. And so I thought I would spend a few minutes with you to share a concept that we teach at my agency called highest and best use. Highest and best use is actually a real estate term. They use it, developers use it when they're thinking about a plot of land. And they think about, in this given square footage, what is the highest return on investment we could think about with this particular set of boundaries that we have. And we apply that same principle at our work and at our jobs at Lions and Tigers. You see, my agency is a little bit different because we mostly focus on the flexible freelance space. And so what I've seen over watching hundreds of consultants craft their own paths for the kinds of work that they want to do, maybe it's 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week, or full-time. What they think about is the skills and talents that they have that are uniquely theirs in the container that they have available to them. I also kind of am a fan of the concept of financial feminism. And so, when I think about highest and best use, I think about spending as little time as I can to make as much money as I can to do all the rest of the stuff in my life that I need to do. And so what I've seen across these successful consultants is that, it's really a combination of self-awareness, confidence, the resources that you have available to you, and then boundary setting. And, I grew up in this corporate world reading folks like Tim Ferriss. And, when he wrote his book called The 4-Hour Workweek, one of the quotes in there was that, doing something unimportant well does not make it important. And I think that that's true. However, some of the unique things that I have to think about is the caretaking responsibilities that I have in my life. And so although Tim was fighting for a day where he could go on vacation and his business would run itself, I've got a bunch of other people I need to take care of, the people that work for me and the children that I'm raising. And so my motivation is different. And so I've come up with a couple of questions that, we start with at Lions and Tigers when we're working with a client or a consultant to try to start identifying our highest and best use. And so you see those questions here. The first one is, what gives me the most joy in the world? What would I drop everything if I could go and do that one thing? And you might hear other people think about this as a passion area, but for me, joy is this word that really signifies that it brings so much light into my life. The next question is, what am I most likely to charge a premium for? And those things have to come together, because you might have great joy at a hobby, at painting or woodworking, or like whatever your hobby is. For me, it's wine tasting. But I'm certainly not able to charge a premium for that. So that's certainly the marketability of that particular task. I also then think about that in the terms of the economic value of that task. So as an agency owner, my time is very precious. And so I often think about my billability. So if everyone was to think like a consultant and think that this task is worth $10 an hour in the world, this task is worth $100 an hour in the world, or gosh, this is the only thing that, I can only be the person that does this task for $1,000 an hour in the world, that really starts to triangulate then where my joy and my value come together. And then the last thing is, what constraints and resources do I need to honor? So this is about money, this is about time, this is about delegation, and it's different for every person based on, what your priorities are. I will tell you that once I hired someone to cut my lawn, it was a really big difference in my weekends. It's such a small example, I know, but there's lots of examples, your cutting your lawn examples, where you can start delegating to preserve your time to keep you in your highest and best use. So that's the concept I wanted to share with everyone today. I'm still tired, but I definitely feel like I'm working in my highest and best use despite being tired. So hopefully that's a little bit of help for our audience today, Giovanna.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bria. That was really inspiring. And I also loved Tim Ferriss, and I read The 4-Hour Work Week, and I thought it was very inspiring. In fact, I was reading that as I was starting MNC Consulting, my first company, and thought, wow, would I like a life like that? Only working 4 hours a week. Anyway, thank you so much again, Bria. And also for inviting us to consider what brings us most joy. I think that's a really important question to remember every day as well. Okay, next we are moving on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Ellie Wu, the Senior Director of Customer Experience Transformation with SAP Concur. Ellie is going to speak with us today about Sanity Stack. Ellie, so excited to hear from you. Off to you.
Thank you, Giovanna. Hi, everyone. Ellie Wu here, and so excited to share my Sanity Stack with you today. But before I jump into all of those details, I thought it'd be helpful to set a little bit of context. And so my parents are immigrants, and they brought me to this country when I was 6 months old. And why I share that is because I grew up in a household where hard work and sacrifice was our love language. But there was one thing I remember my mom doing when I was even just, as long as I can remember, is that definitely on the weekends, that was her time. Usually just Saturday, but sometimes it would be Saturday or Sunday, where she would take off for a few hours and go play mahjong, which is essentially like Asian lady poker. And during that time, you just knew not to bother her, that it was her time. And that really set an expectation for myself very early on, that putting yourself first and taking time for you is okay. And it's just part of how things run in the household. And so when I think about how I apply that to today, I loved so many things about what Bria shared about the highest and best use. Actually, one of the things I thought about is the highest and best use of the different screens, like my home screen on my phone. What are the apps that I use the most? And thinking about that in a way that can help me when it comes to technology. I grew up in the Bay Area and love to find ways to use technology to make my life easier. And so here's my sanity stack. Starting on the left side, it's how do I figure out what my to-do list looks like and why it's important for us to really think about what's urgent, what's important, what do I do, what do I delegate, and what do I just delete, and that's okay. It's because so often we get into the mode of thinking about, oh, I should do this, or I should help them with that. And there's all these things that we just end up shooting all over ourselves. And what that leads to is us just kind of burning our own candles at both ends, and that's not going to serve anyone. And so what this matrix helps me do is set my direction. And when you think about what's more important, direction or speed, certainly direction can help us calibrate how fast or slow we should be going at any time and help us whittle down what it is that we need to do. And then once we have kind of our compass set and we've got the direction clear, then we can think about how do we leverage technologies like Smartsheet, Notion's another one I've recently gotten into and have just been obsessed with the capabilities of using these building blocks and Legos to run my life because there's a lot going on and it just helps with the mental tax. And it's like, hey, is this thing that I'm supposed to do tomorrow or is it next week? What day is it? Because I gotta tell you, after 2020, I feel like these weeks just keep flying by and everything seems to mush together. So these tools help me minimize the mental tax that I have trying to keep track of everything else in different ways. So you don't always need to have like a full-blown Notion setup. It can be something as simple as a sheet or even a pad of paper. So whatever works for you. Then over in the upper right-hand side, one of the things I love is to read. And Libby is an app that I was introduced through a colleague of mine where she said, hey, did you know that there's you can get all your Kindles on the library? And I thought, oh, well, that's great because there's certain books that make sense on Audible or audiobook. And then there's other books that I want on my Kindle. And then there's a few that I really want to keep as a resource that I can then still decide which ones I want to buy. But it's great because if you love to read and learn and do things, it's free. And so there's certainly a lot of different resources out there. I am one that still loves to come across what I feel like is a good deal, and this is a great resource that is handy for anyone who loves to read. And lastly, I have the reminders here, where we have to remember to be kind to ourselves because so often, we have all these expectations that we should just do it all, and we compare our, blooper reels to somebody else's highlight reel. And it's okay to protect your energy. Think about my mom heading out to Mahjong, coming back, and everything still being fine. We were alive, everything was good. My dad was able to hold down the fort for a minute or two. And then last but not least, no is a complete sentence. We don't owe it to everyone to explain every nuance about why we can't do something. And one helpful reminder I've been sharing with folks is when somebody asks you to do something, they've already decided that they're not going to do it. So don't feel so bad if you have to tell them no, because they've already decided it's a no for them, right? And so with that, you have my sanity stack, and I hope it's helpful for you as you try to prioritize yourself.
Thank you so much, Ellie. No is a complete sentence is my favorite saying of the year so far. It is, I think, very important to hear because often we take on so much, often we take on too much and feel bad saying no. But I love how you point out that a person really only says or asks you to do something when they've already said no to themselves. And so that's a really important reminder. And also being kind to yourself and to play that game of Mahjong or whatever it is that's going to make you happy and help you decompress, I think is also super important. So thank you again, Ellie, for your words of sanity. All right, we are now moving on to our last fabulous speaker of the day. Linda Cormier, the CEO of lindacormier.com, the Heroic Joy Leadership Academy, and the CEO of Gia Wellness. And Linda will be speaking with us about her morning and evening routine. Linda, so excited to hear from you.
Sorry, I hadn't turned my mic on. I don't have slides, so it's really just me. And one of the things I talk about, whether it's with a morning or evening routine and ritual, is to open your mouth and your heart at the same time. And I do that in the morning, I do it in the evening, and I pretty much lead my life like that. But I do want to share with you some specific life hacks and how I start my day. 2020 really sidelined so many of us. I think we're still obviously in the very beginning part of 2021 and still facing a lot of the challenges that we experienced last year. And my morning routine, I have to say, is one of the things that has really helped keep me grounded and joyful. And that is such an important word for me too. Thank you, Bria, for bringing that up. You know, I get the benefit of being at the end of listening to these two great speakers. And before I share what I start my morning with, I do want to say I love that highest and best self and how you talked about discovering what brings us joy and how important that word is for you. The one thing I do know is that when we are experiencing joy, we're likely using our natural gifts. And so I really encourage people to discover what those natural gifts are. And when you use them, especially in the service of others, you actually experience that joy. The things that bring us joy are usually the things that we're pretty naturally gifted at. And again, Ellie, I have to say, along with Giovanna, no is a complete sentence. One of my favorite concepts that I've heard this year too. And I really, really appreciated your the part of your talk that reminds us to be kind to ourselves. And thank you for sharing a little glimpse into your world as well. So every morning when I wake up, probably before my feet hit the ground, I say the following: this is the beginning of a new day. I have been given this day to use as I will. I can waste it or use it for good. But what I do today is important because I'm exchanging a day out of my life for it. When tomorrow comes, today will be gone forever, leaving in its place that which I have traded. That is to be good and not evil, success and not failure, gain and not loss, love and not indifference. I greet this day with love in my heart. I've been saying this ever since my children, who are now 25 and 23. My oldest was 3 years old when I committed that to memory. And the beautiful thing is that she also did as I was driving her to preschool. My morning routine also involves taking some time for myself. I love French press coffee, so I wake up early so that I can devote some time and energy just to my own intentions. I sit down, I ask myself certain questions. The very first question is, what am I most grateful for? What did I wake up the most grateful for? Another question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is my energy level? What am I at, a 0, like almost comatose, or am I a 10 off the charts? Usually when you wake up, your energy level, at least mine, is between a 6.5 and an 8 if I get a good night's sleep. Then I write down the 3 most important things that I want to do that day, the highest priority items, the ones that are going to have the best results. And I also decide in advance, if I have something that shifts my energy, if I have a phone call that might frustrate me, or something that comes in that could take me out of a place of being positive, I decide in advance, what am I going to do to get back to being my best self, to not be energetically shifted because of what somebody else said or did. And so I decide, am I going to push pause and breathe a little bit? Am I going to journal? Am I going to go outside and take a walk? What am I going to do when that moment comes so I don't let it consume me? And I think just being proactive about that can make such a difference. And then in the evening, I also have an evening routine. And my evening routine consists of 5 questions. What am I the most grateful for? What was the best part of my day? What did I learn today? How did I help somebody today? And what am I looking forward to tomorrow? I asked everybody in my family these questions every single day of their life. And from the time my children were, in 2nd and 4th grade, I was asking them, what did you learn today? And how did you help somebody today? And it gave them they knew they were going to be asked that question. I just want to end on a concept that Ellie actually made me think about, and that is all these tools that she had shared that work for her. And she said, find whatever works for you. I think sometimes what can take us out of that place of joy and positivity and overcoming the challenges is when we compare ourselves to other people. We usually tend to compare our weaknesses to somebody else's strengths. And so I'm listening, and I found myself I'm listening to Ellie, and I'm like, oh, I don't know this app. I've never heard of this app. I need to write things down, pen on paper. I would be so nervous, or it would be really challenging for me to use a computer in that way. And so I think the most important thing is to remember to discover what works for us, not to compare ourselves to anybody else, maybe model somebody else's behavior and their mindset. But those are the things that keep me on track and have helped me navigate 2020. So Giovanna, I'll send it back over to you. And I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much, Linda. You're so inspiring. And I really, really loved those tips. In fact, your last point about comparison and not comparing, I think was really important. A good friend of mine said to me once that comparison destroys joy. Because when you start to compare, you're basically saying, I don't have, right? Like you start to compare yourself to what you feel like you do have, what you don't have. And then in many circumstances, you're weighing yourself against an impossibility, because what brings you joy is going to be different than what brings someone else joy. And our opportunities are necessarily going to be different. And I think that's so important, is to just recognize and be grateful for what we do have and what brings us joy. And then to rejoice when we see other people succeeding in their opportunities. Right? And to rejoice in that fact, right? Because comparison also breeds jealousy and competition. And those are super unhealthy. And really, we're the ones that suffer when we experience that. Yeah. So, thank you.
I could not agree more. Thank you so much for highlighting that. And I think sometimes too, when we compare ourselves, especially if we're comparing our weaknesses to someone else's strength, then we're focusing on our weaknesses rather than leveraging our strengths.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that you had that comment, Linda, because I was thinking about, sure, I can play around with some spreadsheets, but you turn water into magic. So there is that.
I joke around, I'll use a spreadsheet if it's an emergency.
Right. Well, on that note, we're now moving into the panelist Q&A. This has been a really beautiful set of stories, and thank you so much, Bria and Ellie and Linda, for sharing your life hacks to restore mind, body, and spirit in the midst of all the changes that the last year have brought. And so we're going to kick this off with a really simple question. And I think that we've, each one of you have touched on this in your talk. And the first question is, do you feel you prioritize yourself in the midst of your work, right? Like, we all have ways that we are working on building our schedules around a more healthy work-life balance. But at this time, do you feel like you are actually a priority in your own life? And to what extent?
I'll go first. The short answer is no, kinda. So, as I mentioned, I'm caretaking for young children, not sleeping a lot. I'm running on fumes in some ways. But I think when I think about self-care, and in the traditional sense, you think of like bubble baths or pedicures. You know what I did last weekend? I organized my closet. I took out all of my maternity clothes that no longer serve me, and I took them out, and so that I only have the stuff in there that fits me, that makes me feel like okay right now. And that was my moment of prioritization and self-care. I'm also like in a very different entrepreneurial space. I have a lot of these like really new curiosities. And so anytime I listen to a podcast or like go into a community that I'm curious about, that for me is like self-care and management. So I've just changed my definition of it for like where I'm at right now, which is in a different spot than pedicures and massages.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I also think when we talk about self-care, we're not talking about being self-centered, right? And they're really different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that women often think that like, if we take care of ourselves, then we're not taking care of other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's this fine line between actually caring for yourself and not letting yourself be so drained that like, you can't do anything else. And we try and do everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're talking about prioritizing ourselves, we're not talking about, again, being self-centered. We're talking about actually just taking care of ourselves. And is that something that we do? So thank you, Bria, for sharing that.
Yeah, any machine or like even robots, they need to rest. Like I don't know about you, but I used to always just shut my laptop and just take off and go do the next thing. Every once in a while, it stops working and you call IT and they're like, you got to shut it all the way down, right? So everything needs to rest. And I love that idea that self-care it's not selfish, right? And also when you think about self-care, it can just be skipping that meeting if you don't really need to go and getting the notes from someone. Like that can be a very nice form of self-care, especially when we can feel like we're just totally zoomed out. And you just say, I'm not going to go to this event. I'm not going to go to this thing, and it'll be okay. And I'll get the notes, or I'll watch the recording, or, hey, oh my gosh, I might miss it. And then what, right? Is it really that big a deal?
Yeah, I think just to pick up on what Ellie was saying, I think for me, a lot of the self-care is asking myself the question, what is it that I need right now? I tend to be wired in a pretty positive way. And so if I find myself out of sorts, I'll ask myself, what is it that I need right now? And that isn't, a manicure or a pedicure. Sometimes it is organizing, like Bria was saying, organizing the closet so that you're doing something that you want to do. I discovered, I think it was in 2020, I told my husband on a Saturday, I said, I want to have one day that I do what I want, when I want, where I want. I don't want even you to ask me if you can bring me a cup of coffee. I don't want you to ask me one single question. I just want that space. And my kids are grown, not like yours, Bria. So I have the luxury of both adult children being out, but really recognizing what it is that you need. And sometimes what we need is to not make a decision fatigue. For those of us that run companies or multiple companies, sometimes I just don't want to make a decision. So I think it's really just recognizing what is it that you need, and recognizing, all of you said it, you can't give away what you don't have. So we have to refuel ourselves, whatever it looks like, and being totally okay with whatever that is. But I think when we're conscious about it and make the choice, like I love the idea of the organizing of the closet. I think that I personally, that's not one of my strengths, but I totally see the joy in it, and maybe one day I'll go there. But just recognizing what is it that you need that's going to give you that feeling of self-care, and not thinking that it has to be, like you're talking about going to a spa.
Mm-hmm.
Although that sounds lovely too.
I was just going to say,
right? I don't even know if they're open. It's been a while.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And in fact, my husband and I spent this past weekend cleaning the whole house, like full deep dive. And for us, that was exciting. Like we actually loved it, because we're both very busy people. And so have the opportunity and the time to actually kind of just stop and say, we just have to like take care of our home was fun. And I don't normally think that about cleaning, to be fair, right? Like it's not at the top of my list of fun things, but this weekend it was fun because it didn't feel like a frantic, rushed, like I just have to do this now, right? So perfect. Okay, so our next question will be, Okay, so we've all gone through a process in our professional careers, and we've gotten to where we are today with, with hard work and developing different ways of doing things. What would you tell yourself in your early 20s or at the beginning of your professional career? What do you wish you could tell yourself? You could go back in time about how to prioritize yourself at that time, at the very beginning.
Yeah, I can jump in on this one first. I don't know why this is popping to the front of my mind, but it is. I think prioritizing yourself when you choose a partner or when you choose whoever you're going to go through life with. I think back to my early 20s, and man, I would have made some different decisions back then. But if I could help myself understand that you're choosing somebody to essentially build like a life of a business, right? Like this is the toughest thing. There's so many curveballs and you've got to vet them, right? Are they going to be supportive of you? Because I have yet to come across a woman who has been able to achieve her goals or what she sees as important without a very solid and strong and just a great partner.
You want to go ahead?
I was going to say, recently I've had epiphany about the difference between being cooperative and accommodating. And I would tell my 20-year-old self to be cooperative, but not always accommodating. That sometimes I think, especially as women I was in a position where I had 2 young children, and I always felt like I was trying to accommodate others so that I could be a good mom, and that kind of juggling. I would tell my 20-year-old self, recognize the difference between being cooperative and being accommodating. Cooperating is using your voice and sharing your opinion and making sure that your voice is also heard. Accommodating sometimes can feel like you're not really sharing your voice and your opinion doesn't matter. And I would also, I guess what I've shared with my own children is never doubt your confidence. Never doubt your confidence. You can be confident without being arrogant, and don't let anyone, anything, any experience erode your confidence, because you're here for a purpose.
I was thinking about my 20-year-old self or my early 20-year-old self, and I wish I would have known the value of compound interest. I wish that someone would have explained that more to me. That being said, I mean, I think the hack that is very difficult for people in their 20s, especially as they're transitioning away from, being like, Linda's kids in their early 20s, being, leaving their childhood identity and moving into an adult identity. You really have to let go of the expectations or the trauma of your childhood and transition that to who you intend to be as an adult. And I know that that's actually a very complex scenario that takes many, many years. But as I've gotten older, I realize the threads that are now tied back to my childhood, things that my dad expected of me or my mom expected of me. And I wish that I would have interrogated that a little bit younger in my life. I think it would have helped me with Linda's comment about confidence or expectations or some of these beliefs that I feel more confident in now that are truly mine and not my parents.
Love that.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Thank you for all of your contributions. So we're going to take our first question from the audience now. So for people who are parenting, homeschooling, and working full-time and or caretaking, do you have any advice for triggering that take care of yourself moment?
Boy, I'm thinking about this one because I have so many people in my company. 75% of us are caretakers. So many of us are struggling with this today. And gosh, we're sure looking at light at the end of the tunnel with some teachers and kids going back to school this fall, I hope. But the trigger that many of us are living with right now is a reactive trigger. So many of us are responding to Slack or Teams or GChat or email. And so I think a lot of us are feeling that that true anxiety of underperformance triggering in the opposite direction. And so, one of the things I learned, I took a class really early on when I was working at Microsoft about, it was called Living Your Life Through Outlook or something. That was like how to manage your life using Outlook. It was very, very helpful. But the professor said at one point, I want you to think about email like mail. And when you get a letter in your mailbox, do you run and feel like you need to go and reply to that email or to that mail, like, and write that person back? No, you handle that at the time at which you have set aside to handle that mail. And so I think if we could sort of integrate some of that grace into how we respond to others, we could let ourselves off of those triggering moments in the other way a bit better. So that might be like kind of a reverse answer to that question. And then the rest of it, you have to schedule in. Like, you just have to schedule in the walks. You have to schedule in the workouts. I mean, I think that's what people do. I don't do that, but other people probably do that. So I assume that you have to trigger those things manually.
So while I'm currently an empty nester, when I wasn't an empty nester and my parents were both sick at the same time, this was something that there were a couple of things. Number one, I would just try to carve out a little bit of time to enjoy, like, either coffee or just going outside and breathing fresh air for a little bit. And the trigger for me would be when I felt this tightness in my chest, where you recognize it as yourself. You're like, oh, something is about to snap, so I better like time out. And then now what that looks like is I try to extend generosity to friends, and I get on Zoom calls, or we use this app called Line with her friend, or not her friends, her kids, so that I can distract them for like anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes so that she can go do something. But I'll just ask them about like their craft, and I'll ask them like where their glue stick is, and just like basically keeping them busy for even 15 minutes. That's nice for me to be able to step in for some of my friends who have young kids and just need a little bit, just like breathing room.
That is the cutest thing ever. I like, what a gem of a human to do that. I'm sure your friend's very grateful for that.
She has really cute kids too.
One thing I recognized in 2020, which I'm 56, I thought you'd think I would have known it before, is that I think that I can do it, that feeling like an octopus, like you can do it, you just take it on. And then the next thing you know, you've got all these people pulling on, it feels like everyone's pulling on a tentacle, because we feel like, I think as moms especially, that we have, and then you can't go forward, right? When you feel like you're being pulled in so many different directions. And I was trying to figure out, what is it that could make me tip the scales where I feel like I've got this, everything's okay. One of the things I really realized is that in 2020 specifically, there was no escaping some of the world things, whether it was the pandemic, we were in an election year, the social injustices. There was so much happening that was like 2020 was bringing that all to the forefront. That one of the things that happened was I realized that is what tipped the scales for me. Managing my life felt okay. My people, my businesses, the people I cared about, but it was this exterior stress that I felt I couldn't escape from. And so I kept having to come back to this very common phrase that we all know: control the controllables. What can I control? Well, which is one of the reasons I started a nonprofit, because I have to be a part of the solution. But I think the trigger is just recognizing when being aware enough that you don't feel like yourself. That is the trigger. When you don't feel like yourself, that's the red flag that says, okay, go make yourself a cup of herbal tea. If something, go outside, go do something, breathe deeply. I did discover one app, Ellie, and it's at night, and Harry Styles reads me a bedtime story.
Is it calm? Because I've done that one too.
Amazing.
I just picked him.
I love him.
They have all these people that read bedtime stories. And that was like, this is my time. I want to doze off to a bedtime story. And it so happens that I like his voice.
I love that.
Yeah, I think we also have one with like Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
And there was one about a magical island of bunny rabbits.
Oh,
I have not heard that one
Yes.
yet. I just
magical
listen to Mary over and over again.
Yeah. Anyway, Calm is a great app. Well, okay. So we've got one question left before we wrap up this session. And so we've talked a lot about, taking care of ourselves. And for the people who might be confused about, well, what's the difference between taking care of myself and then being self-indulgent or self-centered? What is the difference, right? Because for some people that might not actually be obvious. And so what for you is the difference between taking care of yourself and, again, being self-indulgent or self-centered?
I'll just jump in first on this one. The very first thing that comes to my mind is that when you're taking care of yourself, it's at the expansion of yourself, not at the expense of someone else. And so when you're really truly taking care of yourself, it's because you need to expand your heart, your energy, your soul, your mind, and it's not at the expense of somebody else. When we're self-indulgent, when we're being selfish, it means that it's costing something, not financially, but it's at the expense of somebody else's feelings, of their convenience, their schedule. So I think that would be the first thing that comes to my mind.
I'm thinking Linda needs to do like a tour around, like just to tell everyone that, because that's probably the best answer I think I've heard. I really like that answer. For me, it's all about context, right? If you have time and the space, and like Linda said, it's not going to negatively impact someone else, why not go for it, right? I think that's always the question I ask myself is, why not do it? And if there's good reasons of why not to do something, then surely, we're all adults. But if there's not a good reason to not do something and you want to do it, just go for it. And you'll probably be okay. It's not going to be this dramatic Sophie's choice every single time you think about doing something. Like, don't overthink it.
That's a really good point too. I think we often worry way more than the consequences of these things. And man, don't you wish that you were a little more rowdy in your early life? Like now I'm like, man, I wish I would have been, I'll let everyone fill in their own blanks here, but like, I wish I would have been a little more risky, because really these things, like the worst case scenario, like that, they're really not that bad. If you lost your job, you probably could get another job. Like, I'm not saying that that's not bad, it is, but a lot of us have built resilience. We've built careers out of some of these, things happening to us. So I love that, like, appetite for risk. And in terms of self-indulgence, I mean, you generally know, right? Like, you can feel in your gut, like, okay, I'm going too far, or like, I've had enough chocolate for the day. Like in my case, like, everyone's got their own compass, and you generally can feel it in your gut where you've gone a little too far.
And I think it's also important to check our assumptions, right? Like I mentioned, I'm an empty nester, and I texted my daughter the other day and I said, hey, do you feel like I call you or text you enough? Because I've been really busy the last few weeks and I'm thinking like I haven't done it enough. And she's like, yes, I'm busy too. So it doesn't feel like you need to call me or text me anymore, right? But even the dialogue or the assumptions we're making where we're like, oh, this feels too indulgent. I mean, just ask somebody too.
Yeah.
Right. So when in doubt, just check. Yes. Right. Like if you either, right, like Linda, as you shared, right, which I think was very powerful. It's never at the expense of someone else, right? The process of loving yourself and taking care of yourself is expansive, not at the expense of someone else. I hate to say it, but I think a lot of people don't know that. And I think a lot of people, like, especially in the professional world, operate under the assumption that like, they're just kind of going around taking care of their business. Business is like this kind of cut dry, I give this, you get that, but that's not always the case. And that's why we're here, right? We're talking about healthy work-life balances. And so I think that's a really important teaching, right? About understanding boundaries. And that's really great. And I think what everyone shared today in this session and these questions in this panel has been really inspiring and really helpful. And thank you so much. I feel like I've learned a lot, and just such a beautiful way to wrap up the summit. And on that, I wanted to give 30 seconds to each of you. Any words that you want to leave with the audience as we go off into the rest of our day and weeks and moving on with the year ahead on how people can prioritize themselves and have a fruitful and productive and joyful, we hope, joyful life too.
I was like, that's right on cue. That's the go bell. So I'm happy to kick us off. I will just leave the audience with, the idea around, we try so hard to come across as perfect and make things look easy. And if we could just realize that there's no value in that, because nobody trusts perfect, and you're not doing anyone any favors if you make something really hard look really easy. So give yourself a little bit of grace and just move on, right? It'll be okay. Nobody expects you to be perfect. None of us are.
Okay, I will conclude by saying, I talked a little bit of, hourly rates and highest and best use, but I think what I would love people to take away is if you all thought of yourself as a consultant, if you all stepped back and said, what is my value and what is my worth, and how do I ensure that my scope is written in the way that makes sure that I'm servicing others and myself, like that contract, even if you're not really a consultant, even if you're not really a contract, if you put that mindset to the way in which you approach work, you will ensure that you're being compensated. And I mean compensated in all the ways that your time and resources and energy are spent, so that it's in your highest and best use. I think that's the principle that I hope people take away from my advice earlier in the session.
I'll just end very quickly with, advice that I usually share at least once a day, and that is open your mouth and your heart at the same time. I think this summit is primarily for women. I implore women to find your voice, use your voice, trust your voice. The world 1,000,000% needs it in the workplace, outside of the workplace, and advocacy in all different areas. And when you do open your mouth and your heart at the same time, I think you're accessing your essence, and we got to bring that into the workplace and into schools and everywhere.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ellie, Bria, and Linda, again, for your contributions. And everyone, enjoy the rest of the summit. Have a great day. Thank you so much, and see you next year.
Thanks, Giovanna.
Bye. Thank you so much, Giovanna.
Thank you.